This is Lasara Firefox Allen. She has recently written an incredible book, which is holding up my computer at the moment, Jailbreaking the Goddess, which is a guide to, it's a radical revisioning of feminist spirituality, and it's an incredible book about the feminine divine. Lasara has brought into being the notion of the fivefold goddess, which has really transformed goddess spirituality, witchcraft, feminism, a lot of important things. So I'm really excited to talk to her today.
Excellent. And Hannah J. Pierce is an awesome emerging author. Hannah writes young adult nonfiction or fiction, and then a variety of nonfiction categories, correct?
Yep.
Hannah has been helping me to bring the Jailbreaking the Goddess workbook into being, which I'm immensely grateful for. I couldn't have done it without her, really. And so Hannah is my co-editor on that book, and she has a title credit. So it's really our baby together, and I just couldn't be happier to have your help.
Thank you. Me too. So we're going to be talking today in a couple different parts about Jailbreaking the Goddess, the workbook, as well as Jailbreaking the Goddess, the book, and how they can work together to really enhance people's experience of the feminine divine, and going through the steps of understanding the fivefold goddess and their place in working with it, working in groups, working as individuals, doing ritual, etc. So I have some questions starting off just about how jailbreaking came to be. Because it really is a radical notion to take the triple goddess, which is something that's just been embedded in goddess spirituality for such a long time, and shake that up a little bit. So I was wondering, how did that happen?
Right. That is a good question, and definitely one of the more common questions, because people are like, whoa, where did this come from even? And where Jailbreaking the Goddess came from is that it is a response to a request, basically. Having grown up within the pagan subculture and having been self-identified as a feminist since my early, since like as far back as I can remember, honestly. I read Emma J. Goldman's Living My Life when I was like 13 or something ridiculous. So, and Existentialism by Jean-Paul Sartre was one of like my foundational, I think I was 12 when I read that. So I've always been kind of a take it apart and put it back together thinker. And so, and Jailbreaking the Goddess really is that. It's a process for people to do that on their own, but it's also a framework to do it within. And, as I said in chapter 1, I'm like, I'm making this up as I go along, and I encourage you to do so as well. Like punk rock, we don't need permission necessarily to do it, but if you do need permission, I'm giving it to you right now. Take your spirituality into your own hands and define it for yourself. That's really the main invitation of Jailbreaking the Goddess. The fivefold model, which is the part that people are like most, it's one of the central elements, as you know, of the book. The fivefold model came into being because the threefold model really doesn't speak to or for many of us who are engaged, awake, aware feminists, who are also spiritually oriented, do not feel held or contained or acknowledged or honored in the threefold model. And so this fivefold model is a doorway.
Right. Doorway is a really interesting word, because I think it certainly works that way for me. And it's the first time for me that a sense of origin hasn't been affiliated with a sense of God or goddess, right? Because generally we think of religion or spirituality as sort of fixed and ordained from some outside source, right? And this is more like there's no curtain, you're there, you made it, etc. How do you take something that is theory or that is, newly invented and fresh and clearly comes from you, and how do you dig into that and make it a matter of deep spiritual practice? What does that feel like?
Right. Well, so, and that's the workbook, right?
Right.
But also, as you know, having, you know, being as intimate as you are at this point with Jailbreaking the Goddess, the book, praxis, the pathway is, you know, a central element. Again, that's one of the core offers in Jailbreaking the Goddess is here is a pathway that you can walk, and here are ways that you can walk upon it if you choose to, or if this isn't working for you, do it differently, please, you know, like, and so I think for me, and, you know, this goes back to the way that I was raised. I was homeschooled through high school. I was, you know, kind of unschooled according to today's parlance, you know. I was encouraged to seek out the things that spoke to me and to really engage with them as a child. And so, and I've kept that with me my whole life. So I really offer that as like the indicator. Is this speaking to you? Is it working for you? And as we go along, each chapter has, you know, a number of opportunities for people to engage with the material, which is one of the things. Sexy Witch also had this. It's one of the kind of hallmarks of my work is that I'm not just offering people something to read, I'm offering people an experience. And the reason for that is that I believe, you know, ideas are wonderful, words are wonderful. You know, getting new ideas is again a doorway to a new way of doing things. But if you don't start actually doing things in the new way, then you're falling short of the potential. Right. And so for me, for me to offer something out that's just idea wouldn't feel fully baked.
Right.
It would feel half done.
Yeah. So as you were going through the process of writing the book, did any one of the 5 goddesses really speak to you? Like, you talk a lot about sort of forming contracts with the goddesses and inviting them into your life in a sort of co-creative way.
Yeah.
Did you find that happening to you as you were writing or since then? I know you've done the Jailbreaking initiation several times over, and every time's been a little different for you. So can you sort of speak to that?
Yes, definitely. So, well, when I was writing the book, I was on a pretty tight deadline. You know, I agreed to a pretty tight deadline. Deadlines work for me. They motivate me. There are so many things always in life, so many things that we could be doing. And always life is happening, and, you know, life is demanding, and life is interesting and engaging, and we want to be doing life. And so deadlines are good for me. And they often end up, even if I have a longer deadline at the outset, they get to be shorter because life happens. And like, for instance, going into Jailbreaking the Goddess, a very dear friend of mine passed away. And so, and that the experience of her departure was, of course, unanticipated. She got sick very rapidly and died very rapidly. And that was like at the beginning of writing the book. And so that, you know, that took some time to go through that, and then the process of grieving and et cetera. And so you can't just push that stuff to the side. That becomes part of the process, especially if you're doing spiritual work, you know, that gets woven in. The book is actually dedicated to her and to Morning Glory, two women who are very powerful, you know, forces for goddess consciousness in my reality, who passed away during the writing of the book. So, and then here's another funny, people don't know that, not everyone knows this story. So then my loved one Shannon passed away, and I went home in between her dying and the celebration of life. And I was home for one night, and I was like, I really wanted bread pudding. I really wanted bread pudding. And so I was making bread pudding, but I was like still in the hospital room, you know, in my head. And I cut part of my finger off. I literally cut part of my finger off. And this was literally days after I had signed the contract with the deadline. I cut part of my finger off. It's grown back, but I literally cut nearly to the bone, cut the arterial. I was like bleeding. I had to go to the hospital. They had to solder my arterial closed so it would stop bleeding so I wouldn't hemorrhage. Like, it was a whole thing. And so I wrote the book literally like with 1.5 hands and my finger in a brace and like gauze. I mean, it took 3 months for me to have no gauze on my hand.
Wow.
Because it was a serious, I mean, I cut a piece of my finger off and my finger regenerated. And so in the process of me, like, I signed the contract, my friend dies, I cut my finger off, then I start writing the book. So that was like, you know, how much of an initiation do you want, Lasara? Here you go.
Right.
And so I literally bled on every page, you know? So when we talk about praxis and how do we make it real, like, you know, and I'm not saying that was a blood sacrifice. I'm just saying it's a thing that happened. It was, you know, that this, you know, we write through the things that arise in our lives and we work through the things that arise in our lives. We just, you can't just stop because it's inconvenient. And so, and it is that way with initiation. You never know exactly what you're signing on for. And so how it became real for me over time was that when I would sit down at the computer, I would say, okay, ladies, like, you know, I'm here and what, you know what needs to be done. So do what you need to do with me today to make it happen. Basically, I just gave myself to the process and to them and made the writing of the book itself a devotional.
Right. Huh. Yeah, interesting. I mean, you said it wasn't blood sacrifice, but really everything we do,
right,
if we're living holy, if we're living fully, is that kind of like bred in the bone, deep, hardcore praxis. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is how, so you asked, you know, did I create contracts with the goddesses? The contract with Llewellyn was a contract with the goddesses.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it. Well, and it sounds like you just decided to show up all the way for whatever happened.
Yep. And I would bring myself, I was actually I wrote most of the book me and my husband's, you know, shared bedroom. And so we have different sleeping hours. He'd go out in the living room. I'd close the door. I'd spread my papers all over the floor. And then I would not come out for hours and hours and hours. And I would just keep the door shut because you never knew. I mean, literally sometimes I'd be sitting at the computer, rocking back and forth, typing with tears streaming down my face. I mean, it was like, it was, you know, writing is an intense process and cathartic and intense and you know, researching about Rwanda, you know, all of the different elements that came in and said, this is a story that needs to be told. This is a story that needs to be told. You know, these threads that need to be brought into our collective consciousness as a prayer and as a commitment and as a devotional and as you know, the fabric that we're weaving together that will ultimately deliver us to our collective liberation.
Right. I would love to talk about that sort of political dimension and the activist dimension of jailbreaking maybe when we return after a short break.
Yes, after a short break.
Cool.